Hey guys, welcome to my 35mm color film guide. This video will help you decide which of 9 C41 color film stocks currently available in the US is right for you. To do this, we take effectively 3 identical shots, each taken on 9 emulsions that we're discussing in the video. And if you follow along in the video, you'll be able to compare these photos blind, meaning you won't know which stock is which ahead of time. I'll also talk through some of the differences from my perspective. This will probably especially be interesting to newer film shooters who are looking for a color film that best fits with the type of shooting that you plan on doing and or your development style and budget. But even if you're a longtime film shooter, or even if you're someone with little or no interest in film, you may find it interesting. But before we get into the blind test, I want to give a really big thank you first to Indie Film Lab. To be able to provide the photos and to compare and minimize the risk of screwing everything up, I actually shot a full roll of each unique film twice on 2 different sets of cameras because that's how OCD I am. Indie Film Lab developed all this film for free for you guys, and that really helped in making this video possible. As you can imagine, a study like this isn't cheap, so I really appreciate their help, so big thanks to them. I also want to thank my very smart film photography friend, expert, and YouTuber, David Hancock. David was super helpful in advising me as I made this video. He's smarter than me, and if you're just getting into film, you really ought to subscribe to and or binge watch his videos. If you've been into film for a while, you probably already know who he is. Now guys, this blind test was a big project, and the details of the capture process are outside the scope of what we're talking about today. So if you want to check out the methods or learn how I controlled the image capture, I did a bit of a making of video that will go through that full process. So I would encourage you to give that a watch if you find that sort of thing interesting. But in the meantime, let's just dive into the blind test. We'll proceed like this. We will show you the blind test. After you've gone through that, we'll reveal the results, and with that information, we'll then dive just briefly into each of the emulsions and provide you some recommendations and or additional information. For those of you who aren't really interested in going through my prepared blind test or who would prefer to look at the raw scans at your leisure, you can download the raw scans. The link is in the description. I have not revealed which film is which in that download folder, so once you're done evaluating for yourself, just skip to the timestamp on the screen for the big reveal. For everyone else, I've prepared a handy scoring sheet you can use to evaluate the films as we go through the blind test. To use it, and this is important, you'll need to make a copy of my template. Please don't send me a request to edit my copy. I can't give you permission to edit that template. You need to make a copy of mine so you can edit it to your heart's content. So to do that, go to File, Make a Copy. The scoring sheet will help you prioritize the aspects of color film that are most important and unique to you and your shooting needs. So the first thing you'll do is go along the top and rate how important each evaluation criteria are to you. First, rate how important color is. Note that you're not defining what good color is, only how important color is to you in general on a scale of 1 to 5. Next, you'll do the same with contrast straight off a scan. Next, you'll rate acutance, the perceived sharpness of the film. Then you'll want to rate how important the idea of grain is to you, though I would add here that you're not necessarily stating what is good and bad grain, meaning some people prefer more grain, some people prefer less. That doesn't matter. You're just gonna make an evaluation of how important the idea of grain is to you. And finally, add a rating for price, latitude, and scannability. For those last 3, we will come back to them. Feel free to leave that blank for now if you're unsure of how to score them or what they mean. With each evaluation criteria evaluated though, you're ready to begin the blind test. For this section, we're gonna go through 3 unique scenes. Each film was assigned a letter. You'll evaluate each film on how well it does in each of that criteria, ignoring price, scannability, and latitude for now. All right, so now comes the fun part. Let's compare some photos. Welcome back. It's time for the big reveal. Here are the names of the emulsions assigned to each of the letters. You'll also find in the scoring sheet I provided for those who are using it, if you expand the hidden column, that will reveal the names of the films for easier reference going forward. And now that we know which film is which, we can take a look at the final 3 factors to consider on the scoring sheet. I've included some defaults here, but these may require some adjustment based on where you live and some of your own observations or research regarding these films. I don't claim that my scoring is perfect here, but if you live in the US and it's still 2019, these are the current prices for the film per frame. This, of course, does not include the price for development and scanning. For the scoring sheet under price, I've included some default pricing scoring that are informed by the prices, these prices here per frame in US. For everyone else, you'll want to do your own research and put your own values there. For those of you who are new to film, latitude is a term we use when we're discussing how over or underexposed a film can be and still be pleasant or usable. Of course, this score is not perfect and a lot of it has to do with taste. Many of these films suffer from color shifting when over or underexposing, which some find appealing and others find off-putting. But these scores represent the average latency values I've been able to research from other reviewers or as reported by the film manufacturers. A higher score here means a film is more flexible and forgiving. Street photographers, for example, may prefer a more forgiving film as conditions vary a lot while shooting, whereas landscape photographers who are taking their time might be okay with a film that requires more precise attention to appropriate exposure values. Finally, I've got some numbers for you already for scannability. Not everyone will scan themselves, so this may not be an issue for you, but if you plan to scan yourself, this is basically just how flat the film will lay on your scanner. So you've got some scores and you have some idea of what you think you'd like to shoot, but before you go out and buy a bunch of boxes, you may want to listen to a few important other considerations for each film. First, let's talk about the more budget or consumer films for Fuji. In many ways, Fuji C200 and Fuji Xperia X400 are similar. A commonality among Fuji films is cooler tones than Kodak especially, and the propensity towards greens in the shadows and in some cases green overtones in general. This is due to the fact that Fuji films have an extra layer in their emulsion which tends to be cyan or green. With Fuji C200, skin tones seem to be brighter or have more luminosity than other films. The magentas are quite saturated, and in the highlights and the midtones, the palette leans to magenta in general. This film is also very punchy or contrasty. As I've mentioned, the shadows have a lot of green in them, and to my eye, they don't look particularly good when underexposed or when you try to recover them in post. This film seems to do best when exposed for the shadows, maybe even shot at 100 rather than 200. As far as grain goes, to me it's surprisingly noisy for a 200 speed film. As far as sharpness, it feels a bit muddy, not really a particularly crisp film. But the strength in the C200 is its latitude, which is reported as fairly wide, although for me personally, I won't underexpose too much. You can overexpose quite a bit. Fuji Xperia X400, as I said, is very much a sibling to C200. It shares its color philosophy for one. To me, it's slightly more muted though than C200, but like C200, there are a lot of greens in the shadows and everything seems quite yellow to me when underexposed especially. In general, it's probably a film you don't want to underexpose if you don't like that look. This film seems to do really well in lots of light and high dynamic range. The skin tones can be nice, but with particularly white skin in light that is even a shade warm, they tend to go quite pink. It's definitely a grainy film, as to be expected for a 400 speed budget film, but it seems to have okay edge sharpness. Fuji's official exposure latitude says it can be overexposed by 2 stops, but most ardent Fuji Xperia reviewers agree it can be pushed even higher. But like most films, or maybe even more than most, underexposing can do bad things to this film. Owing to its low price point and faster speeds or increased light sensitivity, Xperia is the film of choice for many street photographers who like the Fuji look. Now let's talk about Kodak competing budget films and see how they differ from Fuji films. In general, you can count on Kodak's color science leaning much further into the warm tones than Fuji, and just in case you need a reminder, you can look at the tones on the packaging as they seem to reflect the differing color philosophy. Competing directly with Fuji C200, Kodak's Color Plus 200 is Kodak's cheapest color option. For Kodak film, its tones are a bit cooler than what I remember seeing in reality, but the tones stay surprisingly true in indoor situations with less than ideal light. The highlights seem to have a red hue, and the skin tones seem true to life, if not a bit more contrasty than some of Kodak's other films. Color Plus is not a sharp film, and as expected for a budget film, very grainy. Its latitude is wide, but maybe a little less wide than Kodak Gold 200. Since it's extremely cheap, Color Plus is a common film to see with street photographers. While it's also a 200 speed film, most photographers will agree Kodak Gold is a higher quality and more accurate film than Color Plus. While not considered a professional film, many photographers consider it the quintessential Kodak film, the gold standard, if you will. To me, it's sort of like what Tri-X is to black and white. There seems to be a strong trend among street photographers who use Kodak Gold to overexpose it a couple stops for that warm look that no other film can quite create. It also can be underexposed, maybe slightly more than cheaper Fuji films, though some may disagree. To me, the colors do seem very accurate, though the shadows have a slight blue hint to them. Skin tones are natural and flat, not overly contrasty, nor too much red in the highlights like some of the other films. It doesn't seem particularly sharp, and while it certainly is a grainy film, it feels tolerable to me. Kodak Ultra Max is Kodak's 400 speed film. The film is largely very true to color and will be less punchy than Fuji's superior 400 and exhibit less color shifting. And while it is mostly true to color, there is one area that personally I care about the most, which is skin tones, where it struggles. Here we find Ultra Max adds some reds to the highlights. The biggest drawback of Ultra Max though is the grain, which you can really see even in slightly underexposed photos. So now we turn to the more professional color films, and we'll start with Fuji Pro 400H. Typical of Fuji negative films, things that you expect to be magenta seem to push toward the cooler end, and we do see less saturation out of this film. However, the cyans still have a tad more yellow in them than other Fuji films we've discussed so far. The skin tones seem cooler to me, but they are smooth without some of those abrupt transitions to the highlights that you see from many of the budget films. It's also a flatter film than other Fuji films, not nearly as punchy. If your process includes a lot of post-processing, whether in enlarging or on the computer, you can expect a lot more latitude out of this film, which can be nice, more flexibility in what you want to do. But if not, you're gonna have more muted tones with maybe just a little bit more pop in the greens. Fuji Pro 400H is a very versatile film though. It's easy to work with a latitude that can be pushed extremely far, both over and under. And in addition to that, with 400H, you get a bit of a level up with sharpness and tightness of grain over the cheaper Fuji films. Competing with Fuji's 400H is Kodak's Portrait line of films. The Portrait line comes in 160, 400, and 800 speed versions, though shooting with all three varieties of Portrait would just not have been feasible for me. But that shouldn't matter too much, as these films were designed to be extremely similar at different speeds. Though if I were to do it again, I might have chosen Portrait 400, as it would have made things more directly comparable with Fuji Pro 400H. But as it is, there will be more commonalities between the Portrait films than there are differences. Portrait 160 was specifically designed as a portrait and wedding film. Its priorities are accuracy and pleasant treatment of the skin, and a very flat profile that is good for scanning and printing alike. And true to its goals, I notice the skin tones are very kind to the face, and the colors in general are very true to life. Though I do see a bit of yellow in the cyans, and the overall color palette is definitely muted compared to other films. Although I have to say I've only tested with 160 here and I have no experience with the other varieties, I have heard that Portrait 400 has slightly more acutance, since the priority of 160 was smoother tonality in the skin tones over biting sharpness and micro contrast. While reports vary and it depends on the actual quality of light, not just the amount of light, when determining latitude of this film will generally provide maybe 3 stops over and 1 stop under exposing. If you need more flexibility but like the look, you may have better luck with the more flexible Portrait 400. Now, I'm not even going to attempt to hide my bias on this next one. XR100 is my absolute favorite color negative film. In fact, in many ways, it reminds me of classic chrome profile that Fuji has created for its digital JPEGs, which I really enjoy. But I'll try to rein that in as I tell you a little bit about this film. To my eye, XR creates the truest cyan of the films we've discussed, rendering the blue of this background, for instance, with this pool and with this truck, exactly the same as my eye remembers seeing them. When it comes to skin tones, in the shaded or subdued light, the skin looks natural and smooth. However, in direct sunlight, I do observe some more saturation in the reds and the shadows, and even some of the midtones, and that will contribute to pale skinned subjects appearing more pink, although not nearly as much as the cheaper Kodak films. This film controls noise very well and is perhaps the smoothest of the films we've been comparing. It retains lots of details in the shadows. XR does have less exposure latitude than other color negative films, and when shot indoors, it is better to shoot it as a 32 ISO film. Finally, we have Cinestyle 50D. In its original original form, this film was Kodak Vision 3, which is a daylight balanced motion picture film. Cinestill takes Vision 3 in bulk and removes the remjet layer so it can be produced as photographic film. There are several distinguishing factors about this film that sets it apart, but the biggest is what happens to the results of losing that remjet layer. That layer acts as an anti-halation layer for the film, so with that gone, you will notice pronounced tangerine-ish glow around highlights. This is the Cinestill trademark, and depending on who you are, it is what makes it beloved or hated. And while the film does exhibit extremely fine grain, it also has very low edge sharpness or acutance, which makes it appear soft, again as a result of that halation. Taking a quick look at Cinestill's brother 800T, which we are not reviewing here as it's more of a specialized tungsten balanced film, many street photographers shooting at night love 800T for how it treats those bright lights. Cinestill 50D also exhibits this, but it's usually just more subtle as it's less common for folks to shoot 50 speed films at night or in bright lights. But perhaps even more distinctive than this glow is the yellow greenish color cast and that drab look that makes every shot look like it belongs in my parents' photo album from the 70s. While it is an interesting look, it needs to be shot in the right light. For example, shot indoors, underexposed, or in just the wrong light, skin tends to appear, to me, jaundicey. When people are involved, I've heard it reported that it does better overexposed. Moreover, be aware that many people who have reviewed this film report that it is unpredictable. So that's it as far as C41 or color negative films. Now keep in mind there are 3 other really amazing films that are available for shooting in color that we did not cover. These are E6 process slide films. For Fuji we have Velvia and Provia, and for Kodak we have the recently re-released Ektachrome, which I'm wearing, the sweater. I'm advertising for them. I don't actually really like Ektachrome, but I do like the shirt. I did not evaluate these films here, as these are not at all what I would call beginner films. Slide films are a bit of a different animal, requiring much more precise exposure. If you over or underexpose even a little bit, these films end up being a very expensive waste of time. On the other hand, nailing exposure with these films can be quite rewarding, as the colors are brilliant and are very hard to duplicate even digitally. If you're interested in a separate video that explores these films, let me know. Maybe we'll do that in the future. But in the meantime, I truly hope you were able to find a film that you like from these color negative films, and I'd love to hear about it in the comments. For me personally, you may have guessed it, but I prefer the XR100, although for a cheaper film, I will stick with Kodak Gold 200. Also, if you're interested in a similar blind comparison of black and white films, you can check out the videos I've done for those. But either way, thanks for sticking out to this very long video, and I wish you the best in all your photography endeavors. Long live film. We'll talk to you again real soon.